The blood on Marianne Sullivan's hands was not her own, but it might as well have been for the way her heart ached as she buried her father beneath the rocky Montana soil in the autumn of 1878. She was 22 years old, alone in a world that had no mercy for women without protection, and her hands shook as she patted down the last shovelful of earth over the grave. The smallpox had taken him in 3 days, sweeping through their isolated homestead like a vengeful ghost. Now she stood in the clearing beside their cabin, staring at the rough wooden cross she had hammered together, and wondered what would become of her. The homestead was 40 miles from the nearest town of Helena, deep in the Montana wilderness, where her father had staked his claim 5 years earlier. They had worked the land together, side by side, breaking their backs to clear fields and plant crops, and tend to the small herd of cattle that represented their only real wealth. Her mother had died giving birth to a stillborn son when Marianne was 15, and since then, it had been just the two of them against the wilderness. Now it was just her. Marianne walked back to the cabin, her boots crunching on the frost-touched grass. October was dying, and winter would come soon. She had supplies enough to last a few months if she was careful, but the cattle needed tending and the wood needed chopping, and there were 1,000 tasks that her father's strong hands had managed. Her own hands were already rough from years of labor, calloused and scarred, the nails broken and dirt-stained. She looked at them in the dim light of the cabin and felt a wave of despair wash over her. The next morning, she woke to the sound of something moving outside. Her father's rifle was leaning against the wall beside her bed, and she grabbed it before peering out the window. A massive grizzly bear was nosing around the smokehouse where they kept their winter meat. Marianne's heart hammered in her chest as she watched the beast tear at the door with its powerful claws. That meat was all she had. Without it, she would starve before spring. She pushed open the door and fired a shot into the air. The bear roared and turned toward her, rising up on its hind legs. It was enormous, easily 8 feet tall, its fur dark and matted. For a terrible moment, Marianne thought it would charge, and she knew she had only one shot left in the rifle. Her hands were slick with sweat as she aimed at the creature's chest. Before she could fire, another shot rang out from the tree line. The bear dropped to all fours and bolted into the forest, crashing through the underbrush. Marianne spun around, her rifle still raised, her heart in her throat. A man emerged from the trees, leading a sturdy pack horse. He was the largest man Marianne had ever seen, broad-shouldered and heavily muscled, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and a thick beard covering his jaw. He wore buckskin clothing and carried a rifle that looked small in his massive hands. His eyes, she noticed, were a startling shade of blue like mountain lakes in summer. "You all right, madam?" His voice was deep and rough like gravel underfoot. Marianne lowered her rifle but did not set it aside. "I am. Thank you for your help." The man nodded, his gaze sweeping over the homestead. "Saw the smoke from your chimney yesterday. Thought I would check if anyone needed supplies before winter sets in proper. Name is Samuel Barnes. I trap these mountains. Marianne Sullivan." She hesitated, then added, "My father passed 3 days ago. Smallpox." Something shifted in Samuel's expression, a softening around the eyes. "I am sorry for your loss. This is hard country for a woman alone. I can manage." The words came out more defensively than she intended. Samuel studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I do not doubt it, but if you need anything, my cabin is about 10 miles north along the creek. I will be in these parts through the winter." He turned to leave, but Marianne found herself calling out, "Wait." She did not know what made her do it, perhaps desperation or loneliness or simple human need for connection. "Would you like some coffee? It is the least I can offer after you saved my smokehouse." Samuel paused, then turned back. "Coffee sounds fine, madam." They sat at her rough-hewn table while the coffee brewed over the fire. Samuel was a man of few words, but what he said carried weight. He had been living in the mountains for 8 years, he told her, since he was 23 and fled from a life he did not want back in Illinois. He preferred the company of animals to people, found peace in the silence of the wilderness, made a good living selling furs and meat to the traders who came through Helena twice a year. "Lonely life," Marianne observed, pouring the coffee into tin cups. "Sometimes," Samuel admitted, "but honest. No one telling you who to be or what to do. Out here, you make your own way." Marianne thought about that as she sipped her coffee. She had always known she would inherit the homestead eventually, had accepted that her life would be one of hard work and simple pleasures. But she had imagined her father would be there for many more years, had never truly confronted the reality of being completely alone. "What will you do?" Samuel asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Stay, work the land, same as always." She set down her cup with more force than necessary. "I am not going to run back to civilization just because things got hard." Samuel's blue eyes studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Did not suggest you should, but winter is coming and this is dangerous country. Grizzlies are not the only threat. There are mountain lions, wolves, and sometimes men who are worse than any animal. I can handle a rifle, I saw." There was something that might have been approval in his tone. "But you cannot watch your back every minute of every day, and if you get hurt, there is no one to help." Marianne felt her throat tighten. She knew he was right, but admitting it felt like defeat. "What choice do I have? I have no money for hired help, no family to turn to. This land is all I have in the world." Samuel was quiet for a long time, turning his coffee cup in his large hands. Finally, he said, "I could check in on you once a week or so, make sure everything is all right. Would not be much trouble. I pass this way often enough." Pride warred with practicality in Marianne's chest. "I cannot pay you, did not ask for payment." Samuel met her eyes. "Out here we look after each other. That is how people survive." So it began. Samuel came by every week, sometimes more often, always bringing something useful: meat from a fresh kill, news from Helena, once a new axe handle when he noticed hers was cracking. He helped her reinforce the smokehouse and showed her how to set better traps for the small game that would supplement her winter stores. He never stayed long, never imposed, but his presence became something Marianne found herself looking forward to with an intensity that surprised her. Winter descended on the Montana mountains with brutal force. By late November, snow lay 3 feet deep around the cabin, and the temperatures dropped so low that Marianne's breath froze in the air. She spent her days chopping wood, tending the cattle in the rough shelter her father had built, and trying to keep the cabin warm. Her hands grew rougher, splitting and bleeding in the cold despite the bare grease she rubbed into them each night. Samuel came through the snow like a force of nature, seemingly impervious to the cold that made Marianne's bones ache. He brought a haunch of venison just before Christmas, and this time she insisted he stay for supper. They ate together by the fire, and for the first time, Samuel told her something of his past. "My father wanted me to be a merchant," he said, staring into the flames. "Had it all planned out. I would marry the daughter of his business partner, take over the store, live a respectable life in town." He shook his head. "But I could not breathe in that world. Felt like I was dying slowly, trapped behind a counter, making small talk with customers, pretending to care about things that did not matter." "So you ran away," Marianne said softly. "So I ran away." Samuel looked at her. "My father said I was throwing my life away, that I would end up dead in a ditch somewhere. Maybe he was right, but at least I am living on my own terms." Marianne understood that more than he could know. "My mother wanted me to be a lady," she said. "Learn embroidery and piano, find a nice husband in town, have a proper house with servants. She never understood why I preferred to be outside, working alongside my father. She thought I was ruining myself." She held up her hands, rough and scarred in the firelight. She was ashamed of these hands. Said no decent man would want a wife with hands like a laborer. Samuel reached across the table and took one of her hands in both of his. His touch was gentle despite his size, his calloused fingers tracing the lines of her palm. "Your mother was wrong," he said quietly. "These are the hands of someone who does not give up, who faces hard things and keeps going. These are the most beautiful hands I know." Marianne felt something break open inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She looked at Samuel, really looked at him, and saw past the rough exterior to the man beneath. He understood her in a way no one else ever had, saw strength where others saw unwomanly behavior, admired her for the very things that had made her mother despair. "Samuel," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, fierce and hungry, and she was kissing him back with equal intensity. They came together like two wild things, all the loneliness and need of the long winter pouring into that kiss. Samuel's arms went around her, holding her against his massive chest, and Marianne felt safer than she had since her father died. They pulled apart, both breathing hard. Samuel's blue eyes were dark with emotion. "I should not have done that. I apologize." "Do not apologize." Marianne's voice was fierce. "I wanted you to, Marianne." He said her name like a prayer. "I have wanted to do that since the first day I saw you standing outside this cabin with a rifle, ready to face down a grizzly to protect what was yours. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met, and I have been fighting my feelings for months because I did not want to take advantage of your situation. You are not taking advantage of anything." She reached up and cupped his bearded face in her rough hands. "I have feelings for you too, Samuel. I tried to ignore them, told myself I was just grateful for your help, but I was lying to myself. When you come through that door each week, my whole world gets brighter." Samuel kissed her again, slower this time, tender and sweet. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "This country is too harsh for one person alone. I have been alone for 8 years, and I thought I preferred it that way. But then I met you, and I realized I was not living, I was just surviving. You make me want more, Marianne. You make me want a real life with a home and a future." "What are you saying?" Marianne's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own voice. "I am saying I love you. I am saying I want to stay if you will have me. We could work this land together, face whatever comes together. I could move my traps closer, help with the homestead. We could build something real here." Tears spilled down Marianne's cheeks. "Yes, yes, I want that. I love you too, Samuel. I think I have for a while now." They sat together by the fire until the flames burned low, making plans and dreaming of a future that suddenly seemed possible. Samuel would move into the cabin after they married, combining their resources and skills. They would expand the herd, clear more land for crops, maybe build a bigger house eventually. It would not be an easy life, but it would be theirs. Samuel left before dawn, but he was back 3 days later with the preacher from Helena in tow. The man had grumbled about traveling 40 miles through the snow for a wedding, but Samuel had paid him well and promised him a warm place to sleep before the return journey. They married in front of the fireplace on a bitter cold January morning in 1879, with the preacher as their only witness. Marianne wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, and Samuel wore his best buckskins. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Samuel kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "Mrs. Barnes," he murmured against her lips. "Mr. Barnes," she replied, smiling for the first time in months. The preacher stayed long enough to eat supper and warm himself thoroughly, then departed the next morning with a bag of Marianne's preserved venison as thanks for his trouble. When he was gone, Marianne and Samuel stood together in the cabin that was now truly their home. "Nervous?" Samuel asked, reading her expression. "A little," Marianne admitted. "Everything has changed so fast." Samuel pulled her close. "We do not have to rush anything. We have all the time in the world." But Marianne shook her head and took his hand, leading him toward the bedroom. "I am not nervous about that. I am nervous about being this happy. It feels too good to be real." "It is real," Samuel promised. And then there were no more words, just the two of them discovering each other in the warmth of their marriage bed while the winter wind howled outside. The months that followed were the happiest of Marianne's life, despite the continued harsh weather. Samuel moved his belongings from his old cabin, and together they settled into a rhythm of shared work and shared life. Samuel took over the heaviest tasks, chopping wood and caring for the cattle, while Marianne managed the household and worked on preparing for spring planting. But they did most things together, finding joy in the simple act of working side by side. Samuel was a patient teacher, showing Marianne how to properly dress game and cure hides, skills her father had never taught her. In turn, she taught him to cook properly, expanding his repertoire beyond the simple camp meals he had survived on for years. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Samuel told her about the loneliness of his years in the mountains, the dark winters when he went weeks without seeing another soul. Marianne told him about the isolation she had felt even when her father was alive, the sense that she did not quite fit in the world her mother wanted for her. "You fit here," Samuel told her one night, holding her close. "You fit with me." Spring came slowly to the Montana mountains, but when it arrived, it brought an explosion of life. The snow melted, revealing the brown earth beneath, and the creek that ran through their property swelled with runoff. Samuel and Marianne worked from dawn until dusk, planting crops and tending to the cattle, which had produced several calves over the winter. The herd was growing, and with it, their prosperity. In June, Marianne realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but by July, there was no denying the truth. She was pregnant. She told Samuel one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "I am with child," she said quietly. "I am almost certain." Samuel's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy that echoed off the mountains, then swept her up in his arms and spun her around, mindful of her condition. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby. You are happy?" Marianne asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. Happy does not begin to cover it. Samuel set her down gently and placed his large hand on her still flat belly. "I never thought I would have a family, never thought I deserved one. But here you are, giving me more than I ever dreamed possible." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. Marianne continued working as long as she was able, though Samuel increasingly insisted she rest, and took on even more of the physical labor himself. By November, her belly was round and tight, and she spent her days preparing for the baby's arrival, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, setting up a cradle that Samuel carved with his own hands. The baby came on a cold December night, 3 days before Christmas. Samuel had ridden to Helena 2 weeks earlier and convinced a midwife to come stay with them as Marianne's time approached, offering a generous payment of furs and smoked meat. The woman, a stern-faced widow named Mrs. Fletcher, proved her worth when Marianne's labor began in earnest. It was a long, difficult birth. Marianne labored through the night and into the next day, gripping Samuel's hand so hard she left bruises on his calloused skin. Samuel stayed with her the entire time, despite Mrs. Fletcher's protests that this was women's work. He bathed Marianne's face with cool water, spoke words of encouragement, and let her curse him for getting her in this condition in the first place. Finally, as the sun began to set on the second day, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that made Samuel laugh and weep at the same time. Mrs. Fletcher cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Marianne's arms. "You have a son," she said, with the first smile Marianne had seen from her. "Strong and healthy." Marianne looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, and felt a love so intense it took her breath away. Samuel knelt beside the bed, his eyes fixed on his son with an expression of wonder. "What should we name him?" Marianne asked softly. Samuel thought for a moment, then said, "James, after my grandfather. He was the only one in my family who understood why I needed to leave, who told me to follow my heart." "James Barnes," Marianne said, testing the name. "I like it." Samuel reached out and gently touched his son's tiny hand. James immediately grasped his father's finger with surprising strength, and Samuel let out a shaky breath. "Hello, James. I am your father, and I promise I will do everything in my power to give you a good life." Mrs. Fletcher stayed for 2 weeks to help Marianne recover and learn to care for the baby, then departed with her payment and a promise to return if they needed her for the next child. Marianne and Samuel settled into the exhausting rhythm of new parenthood, taking turns walking the floor with James when he cried in the night, marveling at every tiny change as he grew. Winter passed in a blur of feeding and changing and precious little sleep, but Marianne had never been happier. Samuel was a devoted father, holding James with infinite gentleness despite his massive size, singing him rough lullabies in his deep voice. Watching him with their son made Marianne fall even more deeply in love with her husband. By the time James was 6 months old, Samuel and Marianne had fallen back into their work routine, with the addition of a baby who spent his days in a sling on his mother's back or napping in the shade while his parents worked the fields. He was a happy child, quick to smile, and he adored his father. The homestead continued to prosper. Samuel's knowledge of the land combined with Marianne's practical skills made them an effective team. They expanded their crops, increased their herd, and even built a new, larger cabin with a separate bedroom for James. Samuel worked on it all through the summer, his powerful muscles moving timber and stone as if they weighed nothing, and Marianne helped where she could, holding boards steady and passing him tools. Life fell into a comfortable pattern. They worked hard, but there was always time for laughter and love. Samuel would come in from the fields and sweep Marianne into his arms, kissing her until she was breathless. They would sit together in the evenings, James playing at their feet, and talk about their plans for the future. "I want more children," Marianne said one night as they watched James toddle around the cabin on unsteady legs. He was 14 months old now, growing fast, his father's blue eyes bright with curiosity. Samuel smiled. "How many more?" "As many as we are blessed with," Marianne replied. "I hated being an only child. I want James to have brothers and sisters." Samuel pulled her close. "Then we will fill this cabin with children, but maybe we should wait until James is sleeping through the night more consistently before we start on the next one." Marianne laughed, but within a few months, she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and because Samuel was even more protective and helpful than before. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1882, another difficult but ultimately successful birth. They named her Rose, after Marianne's mother, and Samuel was just as smitten with his daughter as he had been with his son. Rose was different from James, more stubborn and independent, with her mother's determined spirit. By the time she was walking, she was following Samuel everywhere, insisting on helping with tasks that were far too big for her tiny hands. Samuel humored her, giving her small jobs that made her feel important, and the bond between father and daughter was beautiful to see. James, now a sturdy 3-year-old, took his role as big brother seriously. He was gentle with Rose, sharing his toys and protecting her from the barn cats he was convinced were dangerous. Marianne watched her children play together and felt a deep sense of contentment. This was the family she had dreamed of, the life she had wanted without knowing how to articulate it. The years passed quickly. Samuel and Marianne added 2 more children to their family, another son they named Thomas and a second daughter they named Elizabeth. The cabin grew crowded, but it was a good kind of crowded, full of laughter and noise and love. Samuel built additions to accommodate their growing family, and the homestead expanded along with them. By 1887, 9 years after that first meeting in front of her father's cabin, Marianne was 31 years old and could hardly recognize the frightened, desperate woman she had been. She stood in front of their home, watching Samuel teach James and Thomas how to properly care for the horses, while Rose and Elizabeth helped her hang laundry on the line. Her hands were still rough from hard labor, perhaps even rougher now, but she no longer looked at them with shame. Samuel caught her looking and smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip. He walked over, leaving the boys to their task, and took her hands in his. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Marianne replied honestly. "How different my life could have been if you had not come along when you did." Samuel raised her hands to his lips and kissed each scarred knuckle. "I am the lucky one. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to be more than just a man surviving in the wilderness. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other that," Marianne corrected, standing on her toes to kiss him. "Mama, Papa, stop kissing," Rose called out, and they broke apart, laughing. That evening, after the children were in bed, Samuel and Marianne sat together on the porch they had built 2 summers earlier. The mountains rose around them, purple and gold in the fading light, and the air was sweet with the scent of pine and wildflowers. "You ever miss your old life?" Marianne asked. "The freedom of being on your own, going where you wanted?" Samuel shook his head. "Not for a single moment." That life was not freedom, it was just absence. This, what we have built together, this is real freedom. The freedom to love and be loved, to build something lasting, to know you matter to other people. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his broad shoulder. "I love you, Marianne. More every day." "I love you too," she whispered. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the cabin, their children slept safely, and around them, the land they had worked so hard to tame stretched out in all directions. It had not been an easy life, but it had been a good one, built by their own hands and their own determination. The following years brought their share of challenges. There were harsh winters when they worried they might lose cattle, dry summers when the crops struggled, and illness that swept through the children but thankfully spared them serious harm. Through it all, Samuel and Marianne faced each obstacle together, their bond growing stronger with each trial. James grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and powerfully built, with the same blue eyes and quiet strength. He took to ranching naturally, and by the time he was 16, he was doing the work of a grown man. Samuel treated him as an equal, teaching him everything he knew about the land and the animals and the business of running a homestead. Rose, true to her early personality, was a force of nature. She refused to be limited by expectations of what girls should do, insisting on learning to ride and rope and shoot as well as her brothers. Marianne saw herself in her daughter and encouraged her, much to Samuel's amusement. He doted on all his children, but there was something special about the relationship between Rose and her father, a mutual respect and understanding that transcended words. Thomas was the quiet one, thoughtful and gentle, with a gift for growing things. He took over more and more of the crop management as he got older, experimenting with different planting techniques and improving their yields year after year. Elizabeth, the youngest, was the peacemaker of the family, always ready with a kind word or a helping hand when someone needed it. By 1895, James was 23 and courting a young woman from Helena named Sarah. Samuel and Marianne liked her, a practical, hard-working girl who clearly loved their son. They married in the summer, and Samuel helped James build a cabin on the far side of the property, keeping the family close but giving the young couple their privacy. Rose, at 20, shocked no one by announcing she had no intention of marrying anytime soon. She wanted to see more of the world first, she said, maybe travel to some of the bigger cities back east. Samuel and Marianne gave her their blessing and enough money to travel safely, knowing she would come home when she was ready. Thomas, 18, had fallen in love with the daughter of a neighboring homesteader, and wedding plans were in the works. Elizabeth, at 16, was still young, but already she had caught the eye of several young men in town. Marianne watched her children grow and build their own lives with a mixture of pride and bittersweetness. Where had the time gone? Samuel, now 48 years old, had a touch of gray in his dark hair and beard, but he was still as strong and vital as ever. He worked alongside their sons without any sign of slowing down, his muscles still powerful from decades of physical labor. Marianne, at 39, felt the years more acutely. Her hands were more gnarled than ever, her body marked by the toll of bearing and raising 4 children and working the land for so many years. One evening, as they prepared for bed, she looked at herself in the small mirror they had bought years earlier and sighed. "I am getting old." Samuel came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You are getting more beautiful every year." Marianne laughed and turned to face him. "You are biased." "Maybe." Samuel smiled and took her hands, the same way he had done so many times over the years. "But I have always loved these hands. They are even more beautiful now than they were the first time I held them." "They are more ruined now," Marianne said, but without real sadness. These hands had built a life, raised children, created something lasting. She had earned every scar and callus. "They tell the story of your life," Samuel said quietly. "Every line, every mark is a chapter in the story of the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. When I look at your hands, I see every fence we built together, every meal you prepared, every child you brought into this world, every moment of hard work and determination that made our life possible. How could I see anything but beauty?" Marianne felt tears sting her eyes. After all these years, Samuel still had the power to move her with his words, to make her feel cherished and valued. "I love you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you too." Samuel kissed her, tender and sweet, and they made love that night with the same passion they had always shared, their bodies fitting together as perfectly as they had from the beginning. The years continued to pass. Rose came home after 3 years of travel, full of stories and ready to settle down at last. She married a teacher who had come to Helena to work in the new school, and they built a house in town. She visited the homestead often, bringing her husband to meet the mountains she had always loved. Thomas and his wife took over much of the day-to-day running of the homestead, as Samuel finally began to slow down. Not much, he insisted, just enough to enjoy his grandchildren, who were starting to arrive with regularity. James and Sarah had 3 children, and Thomas and his wife had 2, with more surely on the way. By 1905, Samuel was 58 and finally admitted that perhaps he could not work quite as hard as he once did. Marianne, at 49, felt the same. They began to let their sons handle more of the heavy work, contenting themselves with lighter tasks and the pleasure of watching their family grow and prosper. They sat together on the porch one summer evening, much as they had done for decades, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Samuel's hair was fully gray now, his beard streaked with white, but his blue eyes were as sharp as ever. Marianne's hair had gone silver too, worn in a braid down her back, and her face was lined from years of sun and wind. "We did well," Samuel said quietly. "Look at what we built." Marianne followed his gaze, taking in the expanded homestead, the multiple buildings, the thriving herds and fields. But more than that, she looked at their children and grandchildren, healthy and happy, carrying on the legacy they had begun. "We did very well indeed." Samuel took her hand, his thumb tracing the familiar lines and scars. "Still the most beautiful hands I know." Marianne smiled and squeezed his fingers. "After all these years, you still say that. After all these years, it is still true." Samuel looked at her with all the love and devotion he had shown from the beginning. "Every day with you has been a gift, Marianne. Even the hard days, the days when we were struggling just to survive, were worth it because we were together." "I feel the same way," Marianne said softly. "I could not have asked for a better life, a better partner. You saved me in more ways than just scaring off that grizzly bear." Samuel laughed, a deep, warm sound. "You saved me right back. I was just existing before I met you, going through the motions of life without really living. You taught me what it means to truly live, to love, to build something that matters." They sat in companionable silence as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The evening was warm, the air filled with the sounds of their grandchildren's laughter and the peaceful noises of the homestead settling in for the night. "You remember that first winter?" Marianne asked. "How hard it was, how uncertain everything seemed." "I remember thinking I had never met anyone as brave as you," Samuel replied. "Standing there with your father barely buried, facing down winter alone, refusing to give up. That was when I started falling in love with you, though I did not want to admit it to myself yet. I started falling for you when you took my hands and told me they were beautiful," Marianne confessed. "No one had ever looked at me the way you did, like I was something precious instead of something damaged." Samuel raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You were never damaged. You were perfect, exactly as you were." The sound of footsteps made them look up as James approached the porch, his oldest son on his shoulders. "Pa, Ma, we are heading home now. Sarah has supper waiting." Samuel and Marianne stood to say their goodbyes, hugging their son and grandson. One by one, their other children and their families departed, until it was just the 2 of them again in the cabin that had been the center of their world for so many years. Marianne prepared a simple supper, and they ate together at the old table Samuel had built when they first married. It was scarred and worn now, marked by decades of use, but Marianne could not imagine replacing it. It held too many memories. After supper, they went back to the porch, neither ready to go inside yet. The night was clear, the stars brilliant in the Montana sky. Samuel pulled Marianne close and she rested against his solid warmth. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked after a while. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," Marianne said. "For all of it, the struggles and the triumphs, the hard times and the good times. I would not change a single thing." Not even the blizzard of '84, Samuel teased. That had been a brutal winter when they had been trapped in the cabin for weeks, supplies running low, wondering if they would make it through. Marianne laughed. Not even that. We survived it together and it made us stronger. We have survived everything together, Samuel said, his voice growing serious. Whatever time we have left, I want to spend every moment of it with you. You will, Marianne promised. We will grow old together, watch our grandchildren grow up, maybe even meet our great-grandchildren. We still have so much life ahead of us. Samuel kissed the top of her head. I love you, Marianne Barnes. I have loved you since the moment I saw you, and I will love you until I draw my last breath. I love you too, Samuel Barnes, Marianne replied, her voice steady and sure. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. They stayed on the porch until the moon rose high overhead, talking and remembering, planning and dreaming. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Everything was peaceful and right, the culmination of decades of hard work and unwavering love. The years continued their steady march forward. Samuel and Marianne truly retired from the hard physical labor, content to let their sons run the homestead while they enjoyed the fruits of their lifetime of work. They took pleasure in the simple things, morning coffee on the porch, walks along the creek that ran through their property, visits from their ever-growing family. By 1912, they were both in their 60s, their bodies bearing the marks of age and hard living, but their spirits remained strong. They had 14 grandchildren now, with 2 more on the way, and the first great-grandchild had arrived the previous summer. A squalling baby girl that James's oldest son had named Marianne in honor of her great-grandmother. Samuel had slowed considerably, his powerful body finally succumbing to the decades of demanding physical work. He moved more carefully now, his joints stiff on cold mornings, but his mind was as sharp as ever and his love for Marianne had not dimmed one bit. Marianne, too, felt her age, her rough hands now twisted with arthritis, her back aching from years of bending and lifting. But when Samuel looked at her, she still saw the same devotion and admiration that had been there from the beginning. On a warm June afternoon in 1913, Samuel and Marianne celebrated their 34th wedding anniversary. Their children had organized a gathering at the homestead, bringing all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren for a day of celebration. Tables were laden with food, children ran and played, and music filled the air. Samuel and Marianne stood together, watching the festivities, their hands clasped together. Look at what we created, Samuel said, his voice filled with wonder. All of this from just the 2 of us. We have been blessed, Marianne agreed. More blessed than I ever imagined possible. Their children came forward one by one to present them with gifts and express their love and gratitude. James spoke for all of them when he said, You taught us what it means to build a life together, to face challenges with courage, and to never give up on each other. Everything we have, everything we are, we owe to your example. Samuel and Marianne were both crying by the time he finished, overwhelmed by the love surrounding them. This was the legacy they had built, not just land and buildings and cattle, but a family bound together by love and respect and shared values. As the sun began to set and their guests started to depart, Samuel led Marianne to the porch where they had spent so many evenings together. He pulled her down onto the bench beside him and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. 34 years, he mused. It has gone by in the blink of an eye. The fastest and slowest years of my life, Marianne said. Fast when I look back and see how much has changed. Slow in the best way when I think about all the individual moments we have shared. Samuel turned to face her, his blue eyes still as piercing as they had been when he was young. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a thing. Every moment with you has been exactly what I needed. Even when I yelled at you for tracking mud through the cabin, Marianne teased. Even then. Samuel smiled. Especially then, because it meant you cared about our home and wanted to keep it nice. Marianne took his weathered face in her gnarled hands. You are a good man, Samuel Barnes, the best man I have ever known. Thank you for seeing me when I was at my lowest and choosing to love me anyway. Thank you for letting me, Samuel replied, covering her hands with his own. Thank you for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who did not know the first thing about being a husband or a father. You taught me everything that matters. They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains. Two people who had weathered every storm life could throw at them and emerged stronger for it. The homestead stretched out around them, a testament to their determination and love, and their family would carry on what they had built for generations to come. Samuel and Marianne continued to live on the homestead for several more years, growing older but never losing their connection to each other or the land they loved. They watched their grandchildren grow into adults and start families of their own, and they met more great-grandchildren than they could easily count. In the spring of 1918, Samuel caught a fever that would not break. Marianne nursed him with all the care and devotion she had shown him throughout their marriage, but even her determination could not hold back the inevitable. He passed away peacefully in their bed, with Marianne holding his hand and all their children gathered around. I love you, he whispered with his last breath. Most beautiful hands I ever knew. Marianne was 72 years old when she became a widow, and though she grieved deeply for the loss of her husband, she did not fall apart. Samuel had taught her strength, had shown her that she was capable of weathering any storm. She continued to live on the homestead, cared for by her children and surrounded by her enormous family. She lived for another 8 years, staying sharp and engaged until the very end. She told stories to her great-grandchildren about the early days, about their great-grandfather who had been so strong and brave, about the hard years when they were building the homestead, about the love that had sustained them through everything. On a quiet autumn morning in 1926, Marianne passed away in her sleep, her rough hands folded peacefully on her chest. She was buried beside Samuel on the hill overlooking the homestead, their graves marked by simple wooden crosses that their grandson had carved. Their children stood at the graveside, along with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren. The family they had created stretched out in multiple generations, all of them carrying forward the legacy of hard work, determination, and love that Samuel and Marianne had embodied. James, now 68 years old and the eldest of the family, spoke at his mother's funeral. My parents taught us that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every day. They chose each other every single day of their marriage, through good times and bad, through prosperity and hardship. They built this homestead with their own hands, raised us with care and wisdom, and showed us what it means to truly commit to another person. He paused, looking out at the assembled family. My father used to say that my mother's hands were the most beautiful he had ever known. As a child, I did not understand what he meant. Her hands were rough and scarred, nothing like the soft, delicate hands of the women in town. But now I understand. He saw beauty in her strength, in her willingness to work hard, in everything those hands represented. She was his partner in every sense of the word, and together they created something that will last long after we are all gone. The family dispersed slowly, but the homestead remained, continuing to operate under the management of Samuel and Marianne's descendants. The original cabin was preserved as a reminder of where it all began, and stories of the couple who had built this legacy were passed down through the generations. The land they had worked so hard to tame continued to prosper, feeding and sustaining their family for decades to come. The values they had instilled, hard work, determination, loyalty, and above all, love, remained the foundation on which their descendants built their own lives. And on the hill overlooking it all, two simple graves stood side by side, marking the final resting place of a mountain man and the woman with rough hands who had captured his heart. They had lived a good life, a full life, a life built on mutual respect and unwavering devotion. They had faced every challenge together and had never once regretted their choice to bind their lives to each other. Their love story became legend in the family, told and retold to each new generation. Great-great-grandchildren who never knew them personally grew up hearing about Samuel and Marianne, about how they had met and fallen in love, about the homestead they had built from nothing, about the family they had raised and the legacy they had left behind. The homestead itself remained in the family for over 100 years, a rare thing in an era of constant change. It expanded and evolved with the times, but at its heart, it remained true to the vision Samuel and Marianne had shared all those years ago. It was a place of hard work and honest living, where family came first and love was the foundation of everything. Visitors to the family cemetery on the hill would often pause at the two weathered graves, reading the simple inscriptions. Samuel Barnes, born 1850, died 1918, beloved husband and father. Marianne Barnes, born 1856, died 1926, beloved wife and mother. The dates told a story of long lives well lived, but they could not capture the depth of the love story that had unfolded between those years. The homestead became known throughout Montana as an example of what determination and partnership could achieve. Other families looked to the Barnes family as a model, studying how they had managed to keep their land and their unity intact through multiple generations. The secret, the family members would say, was simple. Samuel and Marianne had taught them that love was not weakness but strength, that working together made you more than the sum of your parts, and that there was no challenge that could not be overcome if you faced it side by side with someone you trusted completely. On winter nights, when the family gathered around the fire in the much-expanded main house, the oldest members would tell stories about Samuel and Marianne. They told about the first time Samuel had seen Marianne, rifle in hand, facing down a grizzly bear. They told about how he had said her rough, work-worn hands were the most beautiful he had ever known. They told about the years of hard work, the challenges overcome, the love that had sustained them through everything. The younger generations would listen, wide-eyed, trying to imagine a time when the homestead was just a single small cabin, when their great-great-grandparents had worked dawn to dusk just to survive. It seemed impossibly hard compared to their own lives, but it also seemed impossibly romantic, a testament to the power of love and determination. And in a way, Samuel and Marianne lived on through these stories, their spirits woven into the very fabric of the land they had loved and the family they had created. They had started with nothing but each other and had built an empire of love that would endure for generations. They had proven that rough hands could create beautiful things, that a mountain man and a woman alone in the wilderness could find each other and build a life that mattered. Their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic rescues, though it had its share of both. It was a story of everyday courage, of choosing love every single day, of building a life brick by brick and moment by moment. It was a story of two people who saw past surfaces to the strength beneath, who valued character over appearance, who understood that true beauty lay in dedication and hard work and unwavering commitment. And it was a story with a happy ending, the kind of ending that lasts long after the final chapter is written. Because Samuel and Marianne's ending was really just a beginning, the beginning of a family legacy that would continue for generations, carrying forward the values and love they had embodied. They had lived, they had loved, and they had created something that would outlast them both. What more could anyone ask from a life well lived?